Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.
Today we are diving into, well, a monumental intellectual project from the 17th century. We're tackling a question that really draws the line between faith and reason.
And that question is, how do you square the idea of a God who is infinitely perfect, boundless in power, wisdom, and goodness, with the world we actually live in, a world that is, undeniably scarred by suffering, by sin, by evil?
This is the classic problem of theodicy. It's essentially a defense of God's justice. And for this deep dive, our mission is to get inside the mind of the philosopher and mathematician Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz.
Right, we're going to unpack his incredibly rigorous, almost geometric system. We'll be looking at his concepts of the pre-established harmony and the best possible world.
And we'll see how he used these ideas to build, really, a rational fortress against the critics of his time. People like Hobbes and Spinoza, who are arguing that the very existence of evil proves God must either be weak or maybe even malicious.
Exactly. The goal here is to extract the logical steps that, according to Leibniz, should force any rational mind to conclude that this world, despite all its apparent chaos and flaws, is actually the optimal arrangement of things.
And our sources for this are extensive commentaries on his work, which is great because it lets us see not just his arguments, but how he defended them against some of the sharpest minds of his day.
Okay, so to begin, we really have to set the stage for Leibniz. He wasn't just thinking in a vacuum, was he? He was responding to a major shift in thinking.
Not at all. He was, in a way, trying to save philosophy, specifically the older tradition of scholasticism, which was kind of getting bulldozed by the new physical sciences.
It's a scientific revolution.
Right. Thinkers like Descartes and Newton, their approach was mechanistic, it was mathematical, and as our source says, it got results. It worked. It could predict motion, explain gravity. It was powerful.
But that success in physics created problems elsewhere.
Huge problems for philosophy. The source calls them metaphysical grotesques.
Okay, so what exactly makes a new science grotesque in a metaphysical sense? What does that mean?
Well, it's the explanation itself. The new science was all about mechanism. It imagined a single, uniform material nature. You could call it hyology. The idea that everything, from a rock to a dog, is just an arrangement of basic material parts interacting mechanically.
Like a giant clockwork.
Precisely. So in the old philosophy, if you wanted to study a dog, you'd study the distinct nature of the dog, its substantial form. But for the mechanist, you're just studying an arrangement of matter.
So the idea of a unique dogness is gone. It's just particles in a dog-shaped configuration.
It's gone. And that destroyed the old concept of unity. Scholasticism would say the body is a unity, held together by its form, but the new science says no, the body is just a collection, a mechanical plurality of interacting parts.
And if the human body is just a collection of parts, where does consciousness fit in? Why is my consciousness attached to this specific collection of atoms?
And why not to a clock? Or some other complex machine? It becomes totally arbitrary. The whole concept of a singular rational soul with a distinct identity starts to dissolve.
I see. So Leibniz saw this coming. He realized that if philosophy just accepted mechanism wholesale, it would lose its ability to explain things like consciousness, unity, and ultimately God.
Exactly, which is why his system is called a miracle of ingenuity. He tries to satisfy the scientists who need mechanical plurality, while also satisfying the philosophers who need metaphysical unity.
So how does he do it? How do you bring unity back into a clockwork universe?
Well, this is the genius of it. He flips our common sense view completely on its head. He says instead of the mind just receiving signals from the body, let's reverse that.
Reverse it.
Let's make the body parts represent the mind in the same way the mind represents the body parts.
Okay, unpack that a bit. The body represents the mind.
The body is still the mechanical plurality that science demands, but it becomes a unified thing because it's focused in consciousness as a single idea. The body becomes the expression of the mind, not the other way around.
I think I'm following. The unity isn't in the matter itself. It's in the mind that perceives and expresses itself through that matter.
You've got it. And that leads us straight to the fundamental building block of Leibniz's entire universe, the monads.
Which our source calls spiritual atoms?
Spiritual atoms, yes. And they are not physical. They're these fundamental, indivisible, self-contained units of force and perception.
So every single thing is ultimately made of these little centers of perception.
In a sense, yes. The essence of a monad is its unique perspective, its representation of the entire universe from its specific point of view. A highly developed mind, like a human soul, has a really complex and organized body.
And that body acts as its mirror, allowing it to have clear, distinct thoughts and perceptions.
Exactly. Whereas a simpler monad, maybe for a plant or an animal, has a simpler mirror. Its perceptions are more confused, more limited.
And our source makes a key point here, doesn't it? It's not unmitigated spiritual atomism. These monads, they're not just floating around nakedly.
No, never. They must have an organized body, however simple. Because without the body, they'd have no mirror, no way to represent the world. The body gives the monad's perceptions structure.
Okay, but this brings up a huge puzzle. If these monads are completely self-contained, Leibniz famously said they have no windows, how do they interact?
Right. How does my soul, which is a monad, cause my body, which is a collection of other monads, to move? If they are fundamentally different kinds of things, how can one push the other?
This is the old Cartesian mind-body problem, but on steroids. If my thought isn't physically pushing my muscles, how does my arm go up when I decide to raise it? The synchronicity seems impossible.
And the answer Leibniz gives is maybe his most famous and most controversial idea, the pre-established harmony.
The PEH. This is the core mechanism that holds the whole system together.
Right. It is. Without it, you'd need constant miracles from God to make anything happen. So here's the analogy. Imagine God at the moment of creation as the ultimate watchmaker.
Okay.
He builds two perfectly engineered, perfectly calibrated machines, the soul and the body. And he sets them in motion so that they will run in perfect lockstep for all eternity without ever actually touching.
So when my soul has the thought raise arm, my body, according to its own preset mechanical program, simultaneously performs the action of raising the arm.
Exactly. They are synchronized, not causally linked. One doesn't cause the other. They're like two perfect clocks built by the same master, chiming at the exact same instant.
Our source gives another analogy about fireworks.
Right. The path of a vessel ordered by God is no stranger than a fuse along a cord in fireworks. The whole sequence is prearranged. It's a brilliant move because it lets science have its mechanical universe. The body operates on purely physical laws.
While philosophy gets to keep its spiritual, unified mind.
It saves the system, and it's essential because it prevents what the source calls the derangement of natural laws. If the soul was constantly meddling with the body, it would break the predictable laws of physics.
Okay, so this harmony is pre-established for every soul and body. How does this scale up to God's role in the universe?
God is the dominant mind. His mind is absolutely dominant. The entire universe, the whole system of all the monads, corresponds perfectly to God's ideas.
But it's a one-way street. The universe doesn't act back on God.
No, it can't. He is the ultimate self-sufficient foundation. But this raises a crucial point about choice. The universe is made of contingent things, things that might be otherwise. This world didn't have to be this way.
Which means the divine thoughts that the universe obeys aren't necessary truths like 2 + 2 = 4. They have to be choices, volitions, decrees.
Right. Because Leibniz insists there are infinitely many possible worlds that exist as ideas in God's understanding. God looked at all of them, and he chose this one.
And that choice, that brings us right to the heart of the problem of evil. If God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and perfectly good, and he chose this world out of an infinite menu of options, why on earth did he choose one with so much suffering?
That is the core question. This is where the Theodicy really begins. Leibniz himself identifies two, what he calls great labyrinths, for human reason.
Okay, what are?
One is about continuity and the infinite. That one, he says, is really just for philosophers to worry about. But the other one, the great question of the free and the necessary, especially when it comes to the origin of evil.
That's the one that perplexes almost all the human race.
Yes. And it's not just an academic puzzle. It has dangerous, real-world philosophical stakes.
The danger being, what? Fatalism?
Absolute necessity, fatalism. You have thinkers like Hobbes and Spinoza promoting systems where everything is just one long, unbreakable chain of cause and effect. Everything is metaphysically necessary.
And if you accept that, you get into trouble.
Big trouble. It opens the door to impiety. You get either impunity or hopelessness.
Explain that.
Well, if everything is fated, just an insuperable necessity, then if I commit a crime, hey, it wasn't my fault. The universe made me do it. That's impunity.
And on the other side, if I try to be a good person, what's the point? The great torrent of fate is just going to sweep me along anyway. That's hopelessness.
You've got it. It completely removes moral responsibility. And without moral responsibility, there's no such thing as justice. So Leibniz has to build a defense of freedom.
Okay, let's get specific on the types of evil he's dealing with. The source distinguishes between moral evil and physical evil.
Right. Moral evil is sin, guilt. Physical evil is misery, suffering, punishment. And the critics, these astute persons, they argue God is complicit in both.
How do they make that case?
It's a metaphysical argument. First, they say the reality of any act, even a sinful one, must come from God, because all reality, all being, comes from him. So if God provides the actual substance of the act,
Then he's the cause of the act. So when someone commits a murder, God is providing the physical energy, the reality of the hand moving the weapon. The man only provides the malice.
it's a powerful accusation. And they push it further. They say that since God is constantly conserving the universe, which is like a perpetual act of creation, then God is perpetually creating man as a corrupt and erring being. He's continuously manufacturing flawed goods.
And then the final outcome, eternal damnation, seems absolutely horrific from that perspective. The critics are saying, how can a just God condemn people for sins he knew they would commit, sins they were basically pushed into by original sin, under temptations he himself allowed?
It paints God as an absolute despot, a tyrant.
And Leibniz dismisses that idea of God as an absolute master who can just define justice however he wants.
He calls it rash and dangerous. Because if God's justice is purely arbitrary, he becomes indistinguishable from what the Manichaeans call the evil principle, the force of darkness.
So if you can't love or understand God's perfection, piety becomes meaningless. Justice has to be real and rational, not just a whim.
Exactly. So Leibniz has to show how God can permit sin and misery and even cooperate in the positive reality of the act without it staining his holiness or goodness. And he has to do this while admitting that, yes, God could have avoided all these evils.
So how does he do it? How does he get God off the hook for the malice in a sinful act?
He goes back to an old answer from St. Augustine and the Scholastics. Evil is a privation of being.
Okay, that can sound a little like a philosophical sleight of hand. What does it actually mean?
He gives a fantastic analogy to make it clear. Imagine a boat being pushed down a river by a strong current.
Yeah.
The current is God's positive action. It's the force, the reality, the movement. God is the cause of the boat's motion. But what causes the boat to slow down, to be retarded in its progress?
The weight of the cargo in the boat, the resistance of the water, its own inertia.
Exactly. That weight, that resistance, that is the privation, the natural imperfection. So God is the cause of the positive movement, but he is not the cause of the retardation.
I see. So applied to a human act, God provides the positive reality, the power of thought, the will, the physical movement. But the defect, the evil, the sin, comes from the creature's own limitation, its own inertia, so to speak.
The sin is a kind of darkness, a lack of light, the failure to direct the good, positive action toward the highest good. And this comes from what he calls original imperfection.
An imperfection that exists in the creature even before sin.
Yes, because any created thing, just by virtue of being finite and not God, has to be limited. It can't know everything, it can deceive itself, it's inherently flawed.
But where does that flaw come from? Did God will it to be flawed?
No, this is key. The limitation comes from the eternal verities in God's understanding, which are independent of his will. In God's mind, there are infinite possibilities, and the very logic of being a creature implies limitation.
So it's not that God chooses to make something imperfect. It's that to make a creature at all is, by definition, to make something that isn't infinitely perfect. A finite thing must have limits.
You can't have a container without it having a boundary. The limitation is part of the concept. So God doesn't will evil. He permits it as a necessary consequence of creating a world of finite beings, and not just any world.
The best possible world.
The best of all possible worlds. The evil is permitted because the overall system, the greater good that results, justifies that permission.
Okay, so that brings us to the absolute centerpiece of the whole argument. The proof that this world, with all its flaws and suffering, is in fact the best possible world.
Right, and he grounds this first in the very existence of God. The world is contingent, so it needs a necessary cause God, and that cause must be perfect in power, wisdom, and goodness. His understanding contains all the possibilities, and his will makes one of them actual.
So God is standing before this infinite library of blueprints for possible worlds. What's the selection criterion?
It's a two-step process in his will. First, God's goodness gives him an antecedent will. He desires all possible good. In this state, he wants salvation for everyone, no suffering, no sin.
But that's just the initial wish list.
Exactly. Then his wisdom kicks in and makes the final choice, leading to his consequent will. His wisdom surveys all the combinations and selects the single best overall world. Then his power just executes that choice.
And the logic here seems pretty airtight, if you accept the premises.
It is. To say God knows what's best, has the power to do it, but then doesn't do it, Well, that's just saying he lacks goodness. So if God is perfectly good, he must choose the best. It's the only rational conclusion.
But this is where he has to be so careful not to fall into the fatalist trap he was trying to avoid.
This is the most crucial distinction in the whole system. The necessity that compels God to choose the best is only a moral necessity. It is not a metaphysical necessity.
Okay, let's slow down and really define that difference. Metaphysical necessity is something where the opposite is a logical contradiction, a square circle. It's impossible for it to be otherwise.
Correct. If God chose this world out of metaphysical necessity, it would mean no other world was actually possible. His choice would be an illusion, and we'd be right back in Spinoza's fatalism.
But moral necessity is different.
It's the necessity of reason and wisdom. It's like saying a perfectly wise person is bound to make the wise choice. God's choice is free because he is choosing from among several genuinely possible options. He is determined only by the preponderating goodness of the object.
So, other worlds are metaphysically possible, but for a perfectly good God to choose a second-best world would be morally unthinkable.
Exactly. It would be a contradiction of his nature, but not a contradiction of logic itself.
But what about the fatalist counterargument? If God foresaw this entire sequence of events, including my choices, because it was part of the best plan, then that sequence is certain. Doesn't certainty equal necessity?
Leibniz says no. That's only a hypothetical necessity. It's like saying if this event is going to happen, then it must be in the future. That's true, but it doesn't make the event itself necessary. God's decree to create this world doesn't change the nature of the contingent events within it.
So my free will is still real, even though God knew exactly what I was going to choose when he picked this blueprint.
Yes. Your choice is a real contingent part of the sequence he selected. And this is also why things like prayer aren't useless in a preordained world.
I was going to ask about that. If it's all set, why pray?
Because in the blueprint for the best possible world, your prayer at time X was already factored in as an ideal cause that led to the outcome Y. Your prayer isn't changing the plan, it is part of the plan. You are playing your essential role in bringing about the best possible result.
That's a fascinating way to think about it. My actions are an integral part of the machinery of the best world.
Right. So now we have to circle back to the paradox. If this is the best world, why did evil have to be part of the package? Why couldn't the best world have just been perfect?
Because, as Leibniz argues, the evils we see could not have been reasonably excluded. They actually serve to augment the total good.
This is a really bold claim. It's not just that God tolerates evil, it's that evil is a necessary ingredient for a greater good.
And he's drawing on a long tradition here, right?
Yeah.
St. Augustine and Thomas Aquinas.
He is. The most famous example, of course, is the fall of Adam. Theologians called it the felix culpa.
The fortunate sin. How could the sin that brought death and misery into the world be fortunate?
Because a world where Adam never sinned is a good world, sure, a world of simple innocence. But a world that includes the fall also includes the story of redemption. It includes the incarnation of the Son of God, the uniting of the divine and the human. That story, that arc, gives the universe something far more noble and sublime than simple, unbroken perfection.
So the complexity created by the problem and its solution is actually a higher form of good. It's a holistic, almost aesthetic argument. An imperfection in the part is required for a greater perfection in the whole.
The source uses a geometric analogy that really helps. Imagine a massive, beautiful, complex architectural blueprint.
The blueprint for the whole universe.
Right. Now, if you zoom in on one tiny section, one little line segment, you might see an irregularity, a little jagged bit that looks like a mistake.
A flaw in the design.
And if you, with your limited view, decided to fix it, to smooth out that line, you might actually ruin the entire masterpiece. The source says if you reshaped that part to be tolerably good, then the whole would not then have been so beautiful. That local flaw was necessary for the global harmony.
So we, stuck in our little corner of the blueprint, are mistaking a necessary structural element for a design flaw.
And we have to remember the scale we're working at. Leibniz would tell us to zoom out. We're judging this whole cosmic masterpiece based on our experiences on one tiny planet, which is just a speck. For all we know, the evil here is almost nothingness compared to the immense good and beatitude happening elsewhere in the vast universe.
It's an appeal to cosmic humility. We just don't have enough data to judge the quality of the whole design.
We really don't. We're judging an epic novel by one slightly smudged word on page 500.
Okay, so this whole project is an attempt to use reason to defend faith. But he was living in an age where faith and reason were seen as being in conflict. How did he deal with skeptics like M. Bale?
Bale was a fascinating figure. He would argue for the triumph of faith by, ironically, using reason to show how unreasonable faith is. He'd push reason until it hit a paradox, like the problem of evil, and then say, see, reason fails, so you have to shut reason off and just believe. Mysteries are above reason.
And Leibniz completely rejected that.
Completely. For him, that was a dangerous path. He insisted that reason is not contrary to Christianity. It's a foundational pillar. We can always, he claimed, abolish any alleged opposition between a mystery and our reason.
So he's not saying we can fully understand the how of a mystery.
No, not at all. We can't explain the mechanics of the Eucharist, for instance, but we can and must demonstrate that it isn't a logical contradiction. It's not contrary to reason, even if it's beyond our full comprehension.
And he had a strong belief that pure reason, when used correctly, never deceives us.
Right. He says we get deceived when we misuse our senses or make false judgments based on them, like thinking a square tower is round from a distance. That's a sensory error, not a logical one. Strict methodical reasoning is reliable.
And that rigorous faith in reason is what puts him on a collision course with the fatalists, Hobbes and Spinoza.
Absolutely. Because they took a rational system and, in his view, confused the certainty of God's foreknowledge with an absolute necessity that destroys freedom.
Spinoza especially, with his idea that we're all just modifications of one divine substance.
Right. For Spinoza, everything just emanates from God's nature without any choice, like a geometric proof. Everything is necessary. And if everything is necessary, then concepts like will and choice are illusions.
So Leibniz has to prove the choice is real. And to do that, he has to reject the idea of a choice happening without any reason at all, this idea of vague indifference.
Yes, because to claim a choice is made without any cause or reason is to say that something came from nothing. And that violates his most fundamental principle, the principle of sufficient reason.
And to show how absurd that is, he brings up the famous thought experiment.
The ass and burden.
Right. The donkey that's placed perfectly between two identical, equally delicious bales of hay.
And because there's no reason to choose one over the other, a state of perfect indifference of equipoise, the poor thing starves to death, unable to make a choice.
The implication being that if choice required this kind of absolute indifference, it would be impossible.
And Leibniz says, yes, that situation is a fiction. It could never happen in the real world. There will always be a prevailing reason, however small or hidden, that tips the scales.
It could be a slight breeze from the left, or, as the source says, something happening in the ass's viscera.
Exactly. Even the tiniest internal or external imbalance will break the symmetry and determine the choice. So all choices are determined by a reason. But, and this is the whole game, are they therefore unfree?
And his answer is no. This gets us to his definition of freedom.
It does. Freedom, for Leibniz, is not some impossible indifference. Freedom is simply that the prevailing reason should incline without necessitating.
Okay, incline without necessitating. What's the difference?
A reason inclines the will, but it doesn't compel it with metaphysical necessity. It doesn't force it in the way that the rules of logic forced your mind to accept that 2 + 2 = 4.
So we are free when we act based on clear, distinct knowledge of the good. And we are slaves of passion when we act based on confused perceptions.
That's the essence of it. Think about it this way. Your understanding is necessitated by a clear mathematical proof. You can't just choose to disbelieve it. But your will is different.
How so?
Your intellect can judge with perfect clarity that going for a run is the best thing for you right now. But your will can still be suspended or thwarted by a confused perception, the sudden, appealing thought of the comfortable couch. That shows the intellect doesn't have an absolute, unbreakable grip on the will.
So true freedom isn't randomness. True freedom is the power to align your will with your best judgment, with reason.
Precisely. A freedom to follow reason is incomparably more beneficial than a chaotic freedom of indifference. That's why he says we are determined but not constrained.
Okay, with that foundation laid, we can now see how he applies this to the really tricky parts of theology. God's will, grace, punishment.
Right. He needs a way to explain how God can want everyone to be saved, yet some people are still condemned. This leads him to distinguish between two kinds of divine will.
The antecedent will and the consequent will.
The antecedent will is God's general inclination, his abstract desire for the good of every part in isolation. Antecedently, he wills the salvation of all men. He wishes Adam had not sinned.
It's the ideal scenario for each individual piece.
Yes, but the consequent will is the final, all things considered decision. It's the resolution to create the best overall design, even if that means permitting necessary evils, like the fall of Adam or the condemnation of someone who remains wicked.
So God permits sin not because he desires it, but because it's a necessary byproduct of the superior reasons that make this world the best possible whole.
Exactly, and this connects to how grace works. God provides sufficient grace for salvation, but it often works through what seem like random circumstances. The source brings up the story of St. Augustine's conversion.
His famous totally lege moment, he's in crisis, and he hears a child's voice from a nearby house chanting, "Take and read, take and read."
And he takes it as a divine sign. That seemingly random cry was, for Leibniz, a perfectly placed piece of the machinery of the best possible world. God chose a world where that small external circumstance would align perfectly with Augustine's internal state to bring about the greater good of his conversion.
So God's grace isn't a magical thunderbolt. It's often woven into the fabric of these tiny determining circumstances that incline our will. It's an incredible level of divine micromanagement.
It really is. And this brings us back to justice and punishment. If my actions were, in a sense, determined by this web of circumstances that God chose, am I really guilty? Why should I be punished?
Leibniz would say yes, absolutely, because the necessity was moral, not metaphysical. You still made the choice based on your own internal state, your own confused perceptions. The guilt is yours.
And he argues that punishment isn't just about trying to reform someone or set an example. There's another kind of justice that's founded on the fitness of things.
The fitness of things, what does that mean?
It means that an evil act creates a kind of dissonance in the moral order of the universe. Punishment is necessary to restore that harmony, to satisfy the rational order. It's less about revenge and more about rebalancing the cosmic scales.
So even if the punishment doesn't fix the person being punished, it's necessary for the aesthetic and logical coherence of the entire system. It's one of those irregularities needed for the beauty of the whole blueprint.
You've got it. And that applies even to eternal damnation. The damned are not predestined in the sense that God just picked them out to fail. They're destined for condemnation because of their final, foreseen, and unyielding impenitence.
Their punishment is eternal because their crime is eternal. They are perpetually choosing to reject God and remain in a state of malice.
So their eternal state is a perpetual consequence of their perpetual choice, which maintains the justice and order of the cosmos. God is protected from the charge of being a capricious tyrant.
To wrap this all up, Leibniz really urges us to zoom out, to adopt a cosmic perspective.
Yeah.
It's not all about us.
No. He says explicitly, not all is made for man alone. The universe is vast. There are likely countless other intelligent beings out there, maybe blessed ones. Our flawed little planet is just one tiny part of a much larger and possibly much better reality.
It brings us back to that core idea. What looks like disorder in the part is actually order in the whole. It belongs to the great order that there should be some small disorder.
Yes, God, in his wisdom, didn't choose the world with the fewest flaws. He chose the one that was the most productive, the one that could generate the greatest amount of perfection, diversity, and complexity from the simplest set of rules.
It's a universe optimized for a kind of rich, harmonious complexity, not for simple, boring uniformity.
And in choosing that world, that best possible world, God has not failed in his power or his wisdom or his goodness. The defense is complete. The system is sealed.
It is genuinely staggering to trace the sheer depth of the philosophical architecture he had to build to justify the world as it is. It really makes you appreciate the sheer size of the problem he set out to solve.
It does. There's a quote in our source from Francis Bacon that feels very appropriate here. He says, "A little philosophy inclineth us away from God, but that depth in philosophy bringeth men's minds about to him."
After mapping out the staggering ingenuity Leibniz required to construct this rational defense and conclude that this world really is the best possible, here is the provocative question we want to leave you with. Is the breathtaking complexity of this universal structure a testament to God's boundless wisdom and the hidden perfection of his plan? Or is the sheer effort of the philosophical defense required to prove that perfection a warning about the ultimate limits of human reason when it tries to justify suffering? You can mull on that until our next deep dive.